In 1979, the United States acted with diplomacy when, following the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, they unsuccessfully requested that the USSR withdraw. The consequences of this failure resulted in a boycott of the 1980 Olympics by the US and 64 additional countries, causing more than 200 American athletes and many others to give up their dreams. The boycott was heavily debated and led to legal action against the US Olympic panel, and a later revenge boycott of the 1984 Olympics.
Olympic boycotts weren't new. Just 4 years earlier, most of the countries of sub-Saharan Africa boycotted the Summer Games in Montreal to protest against the attendance of New Zealand sending a team to play with the racist South Africa. In 1956, multiple Western European nations boycotted the Games in Melbourne, Australia, because of the Soviet invasion of Hungary earlier that year. Although the Olympics is meant to be a sports competition, many countries express political goals and messages through the Games.
In 1979, the United States acted with diplomacy when, following the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, they unsuccessfully requested that the USSR withdraw. The consequences of this failure resulted in a boycott of the 1980 Olympics by the US and 64 additional countries, causing more than 200 American athletes and many others to give up their dreams. The boycott was heavily debated and led to legal action against the US Olympic panel, and a later revenge boycott of the 1984 Olympics. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, it was met with lots of controversy. Western governments first gave thought to boycotting the 1980 Moscow Summer Olympics at the December 20th, 1979 meeting of NATO representatives. At the time, President Jimmy Carter was pushing for the Olympics to be moved from Moscow. However, soon later, the International Olympic Committee would declare that the Olympics were to stay in its original host city, causing the president to change his decision to a boycott.
73 members present at the 82nd session of the International Olympic Committee are unanimous that the Games must be held in Moscow as planned.
Few countries were interested in joining at the time, but the proposal gained attention after the Russian dissident Andrei Sakharov called for a boycott in early January. President Carter diplomatically stated that the USSR must pull out their troops from Afghanistan or face consequences which would include the boycott of their upcoming Summer Olympics.
50,000 heavily armed Soviet troops have crossed the border.
By all accounts, the Soviet takeover was meticulously planned and skillfully executed. But it has not been clear just how the Soviets were able to set up their coup without the Afghans realizing what they had in mind.
We started hearing some rumblings about the government and some possibilities of some interference and something, but we didn't take it very seriously.
Back then, we didn't have the kind of news cycle we have now. And I think when we first started hearing about it, it was sort of a natural emotion, I think, where the kids felt today, and that's complete denial. Like, there's no way this is going to happen.
I believe that I refused every interview of anybody that wanted to talk about the potential boycott of the Olympic Games because I didn't want to take it away from my focus and my strategy on trying to make the team.
And even if there was even a whisper about it, we just assume they'll work it out, but there's no way they're not going to send the U.S. to an Olympic Games. They're just not going to do it.
Sometime, I guess around January, we started hearing rumors that the United States might boycott because the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. And I just kept hoping and praying that those were just rumors.
Good friend of Canada. And we don't want that they think that this boycott is against them. We want to thank them for the good welcome they give to all the Africans here. This boycott is against New Zealand. is a problem of humanity of man.
U.S. President Jimmy Carter brought 150 athletes to the White House on March 21, 1980 for a briefing of the boycott situation, but ended up being a lecture on why American athletes would not be allowed to go to Moscow. The president had put a lot of pressure on the USOC to vote for a boycott, saying he would, if necessary, take legal actions to keep American athletes from competing. Finally, on April 12, 1980, the USOC voted by a 2-1 margin to boycott.
Some U.S. athletes sued the U.S. Olympic Committee. They argued that they had the right to go to the Olympics. They said that the boycott would violate their constitutional rights, and that the U.S. had no power to enforce a boycott.
Different countries responded differently to the boycott. At first, Great Britain and Australia were the strongest allies to join the U.S. in the boycott. However, in the end, both countries ended up sending athletes to the Games. To try and persuade African governments to join, President Carter sent the world-renowned American boxer Muhammad Ali on a tour through the continent. Unfortunately, the plan completely backfired when Ali himself was talked out of his support for the boycott during his meetings. In the end, the closest American allies to join the boycott against the Moscow Olympics were Canada, West Germany, and Israel.
The 1980 Olympics greatly affected the lives of the athletes. In total, there were more than 460 athletes on the 1980 U.S. Summer Olympic team. Some, like Anita de France, an American rower, had already competed in the Olympics in 1976. Others, like Rowdy Gaines, an American swimmer, would continue on to the 1984 Olympics. But for more than 220 of them, 1980 was their only chance.
In 1984, the Soviet Union, joined by communist bloc countries of Eastern Europe, boycotted the Los Angeles Summer Olympics. The Soviet Union claimed that the Reagan administration was being in direct connivance with various extremist organizations seeking to create unbearable conditions for the Soviet participants. A White House spokesperson said that their decision was a blatant political act for which there is no justification. State Department spokesperson John Hughes said, "The conscience of the United States is clear. We have nothing to apologize for." Many people believe that this was a response to the 1980 boycott.
The athletes then were hit in many countries, not only by the boycott of 1980, but also by the boycott of 1984, which was the revenge boycott. So you had, in fact, 2 generations of athletes losing their Olympic dream, having...
Most recently, the U.S. decided to boycott the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. However, learning from their mistakes in 1980, they have decided not to penalize the athletes. This year, they aren't sending any diplomatic or official representatives, which means the athletes are allowed to compete.